The first video in this series on the isolated queen pawn. What is an isolated queen pawn? It's one pawn that cannot be protected by other pawns, and the d pawn is very often isolated because it happens in a lot of openings. In general, it's not good to have an isolated pawn. That's fine. It's just simply not good to have an isolated pawn, but with the d pawn there comes some benefits, some attacking chances, and very free piece play. And already way back with Siegbert Taras, who played the Taras defense of the Queen's Gambit, it was a discussion between the free piece play you get from the isolated queen pawn and the problem with the pawn that it's weak and can be blocked and sometimes won. So it's an important structure because it arises in a range of openings, from the Panov variation in the Caro-Kann to the very topical Ragozin Queen's Gambit decline that is all the rage right now in the world top, and also like the Nimzo Indian, the semi-classical Semitaras, and so on, and Queen's Gambit decline, Miran, and a lot of openings. So it is Queen's Gambit accepted is a very typical example. So it is something you can get with both colors a lot, and it's very important to understand it. And this is the beginning. I have a lot of examples after this, and I hope you will see them all. It's kind of easy to understand the things, but it's really good to know what to do, because you will play much better. And actually, I have been a little bit after the players from the national Danish team, because I don't think they understand this good enough. There are some subtleties they simply don't get, because they have not studied the old-fashioned way like this one. So I hope they will, they will watch this, and let's get into it. The game we're going to see as the introduction game is Lubomir Kavalik against Bent Larsen. And of course, Bent Larsen is a big hero of Danish chess. It's from a match in Solingen in 1970. And it starts with e4, and Bent Larsen plays the Caro-Kann. And here comes the dreaded Panov variation that is still played today. I think knight is the main exponent for the white side. Here, the main line these days is knight c6 to simply avoid the structure we will have in the game. I think knight c6 is the best move for black. Another option is g6, sort of playing the Taras reversed, just at full tempo down. Anyway, e6 cannot be a bad move. It does, of course, lock this one in. White also have interesting option with c5 sometimes, but the main move is knight f3. And here, if you go bishop b4, which I'm sure is the best move, we will have a Nimzo Indian, or we will stay in Panov territory after c takes d5. Anyway, bishop b4 is the most active move, and I believe it to be the best move. I don't like Larsen's choice of bishop e7, even though it's a very respected variation. It is simply too passive, and black's score is not very good. So I would not recommend this, even though it looks very solid and nice to just play this way. And white takes on d5, not wanting to waste a tempo when black takes on c4. And black takes back with the knight, bishop d3. You could also put the knight, the bishop on c4. As a general rule of these positions, white would most like to have the bishop on this diagonal when, especially if black has played h6. But as soon as black plays g6, you would like to have it on this diagonal, because then f7 becomes much weaker and the square d5 becomes much more important. But that's something you will definitely learn if you go through the whole course. Anyway, castle, knight c6, rook e1. Another rule of thumb: in general, white would like to have his rooks on these two squares. The C file is usually not very interesting for white, even though it's an open file. It's often will lead to to a lot of pieces getting exchanged. And very important rule, this is to the benefit of the player who's playing against the isolated D pawn. When you are playing against the isolated D pawn, you would like to exchange pieces as a general rule. So and of course, when you are having the D pawn, you would like not to exchange pieces. And here Larsen goes knight f6. I think nowadays, if black plays this line, he plays bishop f6 here. This is the main line, and then I think bishop e4 is also the main line. You will see something similar in a game with Smyslov later in this series. But knight f6 is nowadays considered a little bit passive. The main move here, I believe, to be a3 and b6, bishop c2, and queen d3, setting up some tricky stuff. But bishop d5 is not a bad move, and according to Allan Stieg Rasmussen, it is the main move. And a3 and bishop c2. And why this bishop c2? Black was not threatening to take here, so white plays this move. The idea is to go here, setting up a nice little battery down to at this square, and we can immediately see that, for instance, something like this is not something you really like when you're having a battery this way. So this is an interesting option. Rook e8, covering the bishop here, and maybe putting rooms on, and these squares can be weak, so the rook is often pretty good here, but it is considered to be to white advantage, this kind of position. And we set up the threat to take here and take on h7, and of course h6 does not help at all. So g6 is necessary, and white goes h4, and that is a cool move and the best move in the position. I think black has to find some kind of idea here. What he does is not good enough, and it's not helping. The thing is, this of course gives white's king some air, but it's also boosting this one, and it's getting ready for sometimes pushing this way, and it gives the knight access to g5 after the bishop is exchanged. Black has to find something to do here that that is good, and what he also has to be careful about is this this move. Anyway, he goes here, white goes here, and as I said, you would like the rooks on these here, and white's next is probably some kind of plan here, and maybe d5, and opening up to this weak square down here. Often when white goes d4, d5, black and the center disappears. It's to his advantage because he is better developed. He's usually better developed. a6, I don't like that move. That is simply too passive. He has to go maybe knight a5 to avoid the next move, which is also very important. Bishop b3, strong move. After this is played, the bishop belongs on this diagonal. And yeah, knight a5, natural move, opening up for the bishop, taking control back over this square and attacking here, but it doesn't help that much, because after these moves, white is still he does have a clear advantage in this at this stage of the game. It's clear that white, yes, this one is weak, but he has only active pieces, good attacking chances, and maybe sometimes he will simply blast black off the board. Sometimes it was even with something like this and d5, and you just get blown away. So black plays b5, hoping to put the knight here, and starts to annoy white a little bit. Knight e5 takes more control over the square, and this is often a good move when black has moved this one here. If it goes there before, you can usually just take it, and this transformation is in general not so dangerous for black unless he loses instantly. Here, often after 95, if it's premature, you could go here, but here this is simply too dangerous, and white will, I don't think, followed by something like this is, and this move is simply horrible for white. So for black. So you cannot play knight back. So the knight is sort of trapped here. You might even threaten b4, but maybe. Or maybe you're threatening this move. So do something, knight here, and this is also a standard thing. The problem is white is simply too well developed here, so his initiative will just continue. We will exchange everything, and then we'll have this one against this one, and white will have a nice kingside attack. So take. That looks unnatural, but it's something you should always consider what to take with on d5. Thinking there is really good idea. Bishop take, bishop takes, rook take, and take. And here Larsen makes an instructive mistake. He could, of course, after this move, white is of course better here. The king side is weak and so on, but it's maybe not lost. And you might be able to defend this, and you do have chances to get your knight into the game again. Something, maybe even something like this. So this was the last chance, but instead he played this move, and I don't think he saw this move. And maybe he saw this move, but the thing is, the queen cannot go anywhere where it would like to go due to the checks here. That is very, very annoying. So the queen is sort of stuck, and something like this is really, really, really unpleasant. So it's not so easy to have to find out what to do here. He played queen d8, natural move, getting out of the checks, and then comes another unpleasant surprise, which is always on the cards in isolated queen pawn position, is this move here. Please notice d4, d5, d4, d5. Always dangerous. The thing is, it also opens this diagonal for the queen, making this poor little king here very unsafe. He has to take queen d4, threatening mate in 2 moves with this move, and queen h8. So exchanging pieces makes sense. Still see that something bad is going to happen. f5 is also getting mated by knight a6 and queen h8. So there's only one move that doesn't lose instantly, and that's queen f8, avoiding check. But of course, this does not inspire much confidence. And Kavalik, who was a strong player, does not mess something like this up. So king h8, hoping to maybe be able to for instance something like this. You get out this this one is a classic that you should of course know, and we will lose the queen anyway. Rook e8, and I think everything wins. It's just how you choose to do it. And here, well, you have to do something, or you'll get pretty lost anyway. So f6, trying to get some counterplay, but it's all too late. And hoping for run, Forrest, run, but it doesn't help. And Kavalik is ice cold here, just putting up. Just having calculated everything, this one is a big fat spider sitting on his head, and it's all funny. This is one thread. The queen cannot leave this one due to this square. So taking here, and it looks nice, but the problem is, of course, this is an eternal checkmate. And here everything win, but this is sort of easy and kind of funny, because there's a pin this way, but there's also a pin this way. But now there's no pin, so there's threatening a check, and there's no, this one is not going to go anywhere, so black resigned. And this was the first video in the isolated queen pawn positions. There will be plenty more. There are a lot of interesting eternal questions about chess, middle game theory that you need to know if you want to be a really strong player. So I hope you will watch the whole thing. It's a nice course, and even though when you have something free online, it seems like you have forever to learn it. One day you will sit at a game with an isolated queen pawn position, and you will make a mistake you would not have made if you have watched this video series. So please watch it. And this was GM Talks, and thank you. One of the most important positions are the one with isolated queens pawns. This is a very common theme in a lot of openings, and if you want to succeed at chess, you simply have to understand this. And this will be an introduction to these kind of positions, and I hope you will enjoy it. This is GM Talks, and remember to like and subscribe. We're going to see former world champion and deceased world champion Tigran Petrosyan against Yuri Belasov as the introductory game. It's in the Soviet Union in 1974, where Tigran, Iron Tigran, is white, and he plays c4. And we'll go fast forward. This is known as the Nimzo-Indian, and the isolated queen pawn position can arise from a number of openings. The most notorious is, of course, the terrace variation with c5 and d5 in the Queen's Gambit, but also in the Queen's Gambit accepted, or in the Panov-Caro-Kann, or in the French terrace. A lot of openings you can have this kind of structure, and it's very important to know how to play in these positions, what to aim for, what's good for white, what's bad for white, and how to play. What are your plans? What to do? Should you try to win the pawns, or should you block it, and so on? Okay. And this is the Nimzo-Indian Rubinstein complex, and well, this is maybe not nowadays. They don't play this move that much, because after this move we actually reached a position where white has lost a tempo compared to the normal variation, but it doesn't change the outline of the position. White has here the isolated queen pawn. It is, please note that black cannot take this pawn because of the check here. So white will take back if you take, and queen takes, and bishop takes x7 with a discovered check, and the queen is lost. This is a common theme in these kind of position. Of course, if black plays something like g6, then there's no longer a check, and white will have to cover the pawns. What you can say in general is, with this pawn on d4, the isolated pawn, you have a weak pawn. There's no doubt about it. But sometimes, and this can be good, it can march forward and exchange itself, which will leave us with what you call an open center. And that is in general to the advantage of the best developed player, the one with the active pieces. And that will often be white. Sometimes it will just lead to a draw, but sometimes white will keep a nagging initiative after d4, d5. In general, white has very free piece play. He has a little bit more space. If we do like this, we can see that white controls up till the 4th rank, black controls to the 6th rank, and we are fighting over, we'll make that yellow, this 5th rank. And white can get all his pieces out. He would love to get an attack. Black would love to exchange pieces. The more pieces that are exchanged, the weaker the isolated pawn becomes. Rook e1, very natural move, rook into the open file. And this is one of the things with white. You have 2 open files. In generally, the C file is not as effective as the E file. So the E file is more important. So often you will love to have a rook here. It would aid in the attack on black's king, which is the one we're hoping to get after. B6, very natural move. The bishop will in general be very strong on this diagonal. So you would love to have it here. Also, please notice that the position changes a lot if black's bishop is on the G7 square and he has fianchettoed his bishop. Then the attacking chances are less, but black has less control in the center in general. Okay, because the pawn is not on E6. A3, preventing this move is often a good move, and bishop B7, bishop C2. And why do you play bishop c2? Well, because this pawn was not threatened yet. Black couldn't take it. So why do we play bishop c2? Well, the idea is to play queen d3. We'll see that next. To create a battery attacking here. And if this knight were to disappear some magically, we'll get rid of that, then it would be mate. Rook c8 into the open file. Black often tries to get some counterplay on the c file and on the d file, and he would love to put pressure on d4, of course. And especially he would love to control the d5 square so the pawn will not move forward. Queen d3, setting up this battery. And when white has set this up, then in general, we will get back to that in later series on this isolated queen pawn. In general, black would love to play this. He would not love to. This is in this position. This is the only good move, just blocking the diagonal. Here's another rule of thumb: whenever black goes d6, white will try to play bishop b3 and d5, and because f7 with d6 played is much weaker due to bishop coming here and knight coming here. So in general, it will, and we will also see that in the game actually, because black will eventually have to play d6. Please notice that something like h6 is not really what you love here, because this actually gets stronger, and now you can't even block it. So if this knight was to, it can never move now. And that's, of course, annoying. Black didn't pay attention. Well, at that time, it was not known what white could do in this position. So in this position, black should have played g6. He didn't. And white has a very strong move here. By the way, this position once arose with Karpov as black, and white didn't play the more or less winning move, which is, have you seen it? d5. It's very thematic. You should always look for this move when you're playing white, and you should look out for it when you're playing black. Of course, black could move the knight, and that would probably be best, just losing a pawn, but maybe damaging white's center with the pawn, knight on f3, and black has managed to hold that. He cannot take with the knight because, well, let's see it. Just so here, and it's checkmate. So this is, of course, not possible. So either he moves the knight or he takes with the pawn, and he took with the pawn, and then comes bishop d5. And now we see why white played d5, because he could have played bishop d5 immediately, but then comes d6. And the idea is that after something like d6, then white has the following move. Boom, big problem. This diagonal is in trouble, and if you take with the knight, then it's hanging immediately. But if you take with the queen, then knight takes d5, and due to the pin, white black will lose material. This is a very common trick, and it's very important to remember it. So g6 didn't help, so he played knight e4. But that doesn't help much either, because white is clearly better developed and more aggressively posted here than black. So after take, just to take back, queen takes, threatening mate again in 2 moves here. Nothing except g6 help, but white will get his queen here, and we see that a knight one on g5 would be nice. Queen c7, and we see another very important feature. By the way, this position was reached, I think, and where white made a mistake here. The correct and best move is this move. And already you're actually threatening this move, because, for instance, if something like this, then you just take, and if take, check here, and it's mate next move. Very common attack. So black is already in deep trouble here. Bishop takes f7 is threatened. If you take on g5, knight takes, then white is threatening both h7 and f7. So there's really, it's really not much fun here. He played h5, and white found a nice little move here. He played queen e4, and that looks weird, but it is, you could say that it's making a pin here. But it's also going to this diagonal. Oops, that was shrewd here. But the big threat, of course, is this move. And after this move, he's crashing through. Take. And take. And here. And the big threat here is a check. Here, mate. And if the bishop moves, then it comes on c4, and this is already a winning attack. Something like this is just mate in 2, actually. He found a move that didn't lose at once, queen d6, but of course it's hopeless. Check. The king is sucked out to the in the middle of the board, and just attacking the queen. And here, threatening mate. And after this move, black resigned. This pin here will cost at least a piece. So this was a classic game from the Soviet Union, 1974, brilliantly performed, executed by Tigran Petrosyan, and it shows that white's attack is very dangerous in these kind of position. They often arise from Nimzo Indian, some Scimitarras, and Caro-Kann Panov variation, but it can arise out of nowhere. And I would suggest that you learn to play these kind of position with both colors. Knowing what to do with white and knowing what to do with black is absolutely essential. And we will continue this as a series, a little bit like we did with the Carlsbad structure, learning to play these kind of positions with both colors. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to the isolated queen pawn position. Very important theme in chess. And see you soon. Thank you for watching. Model games are an excellent way to understand different positions in chess. Today we're going to see an IQP model game by Kamsky, infamous former Russian, now American fucking legend, as he called himself, who won a great game against one of his big rivals in the 90s, Nigel Short. And an IQP stands for isolated queen pawn, and it can arise from a variety of openings like the Caro-Kann, the Nimzo-Indian, the Rogozin, the terrace defense, the semi-terrace defense, the Queen's Gambit declined, and so on. So it is a very important structure, and you better learn it unless you want to play weird system your whole life. If you want to become a good chess player, understand chess on a high level, this is one of the things you have to master. So let's get going, and I think the best way to learn is by seeing games like this, trying to remember the concepts, the tactical ideas, the way the pieces moves, when to look forward, look for breakthroughs, where to attack, and so on. And that's what we're gonna see today. And I'm a little bit, I apologize for my rusty voice. I hope you find it okay. I can't help it anyway. I've been having a cold for almost a week. Kamsky is white. The candidate is 1994 in Linares, which was called the heart of chess when I grew up as a chess player in the 90s. Linares, where it was happening. I think nowadays it's probably more like St. Louis or Groningen or something. No, not Groningen, Weichensee. Anyway, and this was game 5, and it was actually a very important game. And this is the Nimzo-Indian, and bishop c5. I think at the time Short played the so-called Hübner variation, but after this move there will be no Hübner variation at all. I also played this system a few times, and I had a memorable game against Emanuel Berg from Sweden. All this is well known. Now we have the isolated queen pawn position. White is having this pawn, and what we are looking at in the first part of this series will be with the structure where black has this pawn here. There is also with the pawn on g6 and a bishop on d7 with the fianchetto, as it's called. I'm not sure I pronounce it correct. Anyway, this is and this is a little bit different than normal situation because white's knight is here on e2, and it's usually on f3 where I can jump to e5 and g5. So it's a little more passively placed, but it's also more solidifying because it does cover this square here. And sometimes when it's on f3, it says a long way from h5, but here it's only 2 moves away. So it can lead to different squares. Castle is all normal. Bishop d6 is a well-known trick. Black is hoping for something like a3, and he will play queen h4, attacking h2. So white prevents that with knight e4. And now, of course, the bishop is hanging, and this is black's good bishop, so he doesn't want to part with it. Even though knights are rather good in these kind of structures, bishops are a little bit better, especially the good bishop, like the black squared bishop. So black keeps his bishop, very natural. a3. This square is an important square, and so white will often play a3 at some point to avoid a knight going there, because we basically a plan for white is something like this, followed by this, and attacking here, right? So you don't want a knight to come in and annoy you with knight b4. So a3 is normal. Bishop c2, we see the plan is taking place. This is the idea, and it's coming. Rook e8, also one of the known lines. Another move is queen c7 followed by rook d8, which is a bit more aggressive. Queen d3, and it's not threatening anything because you can't do this because black will just take and cover here. So it's not a threat yet, but it could be a threat very soon. So it's not nice to have something like this sword of Damocles luring over your head. So black plays g6. It's a very, very natural move. Bishop a6, taking away the square. Maybe we want to exchange it. b6. Again, we see that black is getting ready for the fianchetto, where it controls this long diagonal that is rather important in this structure. Rook 81. And as I mentioned in an earlier video, the one where Aronian got crushed by Artemayev, The ideal setup for white is usually with the rooks on d1 and e1. One of the reasons for that is that if you put a rook on the c file, it might get exchanged for a rook on c8. And in general, as a general rule, exchanges favors the one playing against the IQP. Exchanges favor the one who's playing against the IQP. Okay, so remember that. So in general, black would like to exchange everything and win the pawn on d4. This one is a weak pawn, and at the moment it's blockaded in Soviet style, just saying, okay, first blockade, then destroy it, right? Bishop, oh, maybe there was something like inhibit rook f1, and we see again the rooks are coming to the ideal square. This is where you want your rooks in this structure. Rook c8, and it carries with it a threat like this. So black has to move. But we also know another thing is that whenever black has played this move, you want your bishop on this diagonal instead, because here it's just hitting a brick wall. Crashing through on d6 is really hard, but f7 has somehow miraculously gotten weakened by d6, even though it sounds a little strange, because the rook doesn't have access to f8 and the knight has better access to d5. And also, so in general, white would love to play to get the pawn, for instance, the d4. Oops, that was a mistake. This pawn going forward and exposing the pawn on f7. a6, I'm not sure. That's a very slow move, and it seems like Short thought he had a lot of time here. I'm not sure he does. Maybe he should have played something like this. This is recommended by Dazzling, but Dazzling makes rather quick notes, so don't trust it too much. I've seen him work; it goes very fast. So knight to e2, and it looks weird, but in general, this is White has a plan in mind. He's trying to maybe get to this square because there is something here called a mate. And here, black should definitely play a weird move, bishop h4, preventing white's next. But white is not, black is not ready for it, so he plays knight b8. And that looks very natural. Clearing this, this line here, and getting ready to get the knight into d7, covering the weak squares here and here and maybe even here. So it looks very natural to play knight b8, but there's a problem, and we'll see it soon. Queen fa3. It is maybe a bit annoying to have it in the same diagonal here, but it works to white's advantage in some variation. And the queen is eyeing this square here, rook c7. And here comes the main point of white's idea. And that is, and here white had to calculate a lot, because this is not easy. This is not easy at all. Knight h5. Great move, and this was the reason I showed the game, because I thought it was such a nice attacking idea. The first thing we have to see is you can't take it, of course. Then there's queen g3, so we got just gonna show you queen d3, and it's all over, which is easily to sort of verify. So, but what about something like f5? That looks natural. Also, there is this problem here. And here comes the really elegant point. Then you still can't take here because of queen g7, queen d3 check. White has, black has weakened his structure. Horrible. But what about this move? Then comes check, and here, and checkmate. Isn't that nice? Sort of, and it's the kind of variations you see them, and then you somehow don't believe them, but sometimes they happen. But of course he saw that. Knight d7, that was probably the idea, and but it doesn't change anything. And white does have a great attacking move, h4, and I really liked the way Kamsky conducted this attack. He was a very strong player who had a very crazy father who was well, he was violent, and he was. I think he gave Kamsky second a black eye at some point. So he's more or less crazy. So here it's very difficult to find a good defense. Should probably take and give up some material or something. He played this move, and this looks like all very natural. Knight comes in here, was hanging, so it's nice to get rid of it. And knight here. And now comes white's real strong idea, d5. Notice this. This is something, when you are black, you have to look forward at all times. d5 is a very unpleasant breakthrough. And we also see now that there is a really unpleasant X-ray effect here. So what happens after d5? Yeah, if you take, I take, you take, I take, you take, I give check, and here we see the real, oops, you have to take back, and here we see the real point of it all, and white and black is mated on g7. Isn't that marvelous? And that's some serious calculation by white. So playing this move, d5, it's not easy. And I'm not sure that white could actually calculate it all. I think this line he saw, and he definitely probably saw something like this, here, and bing here. This I think he saw as well, and it's just mating. So, but and he probably also saw that here he saw this and saying, okay, I'm threatening here, and I'm threatening here, and this must be winning. And of course it's winning. So, but I don't think he calculated further than this. This is also not necessary. And of course, yeah, it is winning. So f5, take, and resign. Black is simply totally lost. There's nothing to say here. You can't really get move. If you take, well, the pin on the queen is also the X-ray effect is gone. But if you let white take on d8, he will play e7 check afterwards, and that will be made in 2 moves or something. So this was Kamsky's great game against Nigel Short, and Nigel did seem to play rather normal, good moves, and suddenly he was just blasted off the board. And this is what can happen. So you have to realize that your position when you're defending in this, we're going to see the next game in this series, we're going to see black defend rather well against the isolated queen pawn. It's not like it's a winning structure for white, not at all, but it is rather dangerous. But you have to realize that it is a critical position very soon, that you are in serious danger of becoming much worse, or coming under a very serious attack if you're not very careful early on. And are looking at your setup, trying to find some counterplay, looking at white's attacking plan, and so on. I hope you like this video on the isolated queen pawn positions. We will continue this series, and if you have any comments, I will be happy to answer them on the YouTube channel or in the Facebook group. Are you a member, by the way? Thank you for watching. The sword of Damocles, that's sort of swinging over your head all the time when you're black and playing against the isolated queen pawn. In the isolated queen pawn, as black, you can look forward to a nice endgame where you can massage the weak isolated queen's pawn, but it is also an attacking weapon that gives white pieces great freedom to move wherever they like, and the breakthrough d4, d5 can create havoc in black's position. We will see a great little example in less than 10 minutes. It's promised a 10-minute lesson where a young Boris Spassky really shows the potential in white's d4, d5. And the funny thing about this is it's very hard to pinpoint what black did wrong. So let's get on into it and learn something. I promise you will learn something. If you didn't know this, it will be a good lesson for you. d4, d5, and it's the Queen's Gambit accepted, where black gives up the center immediately and strives to get active piece play. This is all main line theory. White gets to play bishop takes c4 in one move. It's not like in the Nimzo Indian or the Meran, where usually you have to use two moves to get your bishop to c4. So you could say that black gave away a little bit here, but maybe it's not so bad because black's position is very healthy. All the pieces will have easy access to get out, but white does have a slight overweight in the center. And black does have the option of giving white an isolated queen pawn whenever he chooses, but he does usually not like to do that because it's rather dangerous for black, because he is not well developed and white is greatly mobilized. Castle, it goes fast with the white development. a6, very typical move in the Queen's Gambit, accepted. Black wants to play this move, and here in Miran style development, it looks very harmonious, and then you put your knight on this square and maybe the queen here and the bishop here, and you have very nice piece play. Queen e2, b5, bishop b3, and this is all mainline theory. I think the main move here is bishop b7. Knight c6 doesn't look right. It doesn't look right because the knight somehow is blocking this diagonal. Black had something else in mind, but in combination with b5, it's probably already too dangerous. White develops very fast, and black decides to take on d4. And this is, well, I'm not sure. I think black is already in some sort of danger here. And after this move, bishop b7, black is hurrying. He does know that there's something looming in this square, but it does make a strange impression that you open the d file, and now of course you can take. The thing is, you can't block d5 because of the pressure here, and also it's very unpleasant that this one has an X-ray effect on the queen. So at the moment, white is simply threatening d5. That would be extremely unpleasant. And if you take, knight takes, and you're already threatening something, and it will be quite hard for black to get the pieces out. White is clearly ahead in development here. So black decides to play this move, but that's actually a losing mistake. Because it's already all over. And the interesting thing is, we see here that black at the moment does have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces all aimed at d5, the all-important d5 square. If it's his move, he would definitely put something on d5 or play bishop e7 to close off the diagonal here. But it's white to move, and this is a good rule of thumb. This is a very good rule of thumb in isolated queen pawn position. You should always check if the pawn can move forward, because sometimes it's just very good. And well, ta-da! This is one of those times. Here it comes. Big trouble. You can't take with the pawn, and you cannot not take, because this is simply a total disaster. You got completely crushed on the king side. Your king is hunted down, so you have to take. And of course, taking with this knight that was also in danger of being pushed with a3 makes sense. And come bishop d5, and we see that the unfortunate position of the queen is a major factor here. The queen has to keep control over this square here, but this knight is now out of commission. You can't move this knight because of the pin here. So black has only one move, and it's not good. Bishop e7, take, and you can't take with the knight. This is what you would like to do, because the queen is hanging again, so this pin is really a problem. You can't take with the bishop, then white will have 3 pieces here, and there is the queen here, so black will simply lose a piece after knight takes d5 or bishop takes d5. So you have to take with the pawn. Knight takes, and okay, getting rid of some pieces makes sense here. Bishop takes, e takes, and black has won a pawn, but after knight d4, he's totally positionally lost. This knight is coming to a very unpleasant square near you very fast, and it's already completely over here. Black is not going to survive this. The knight will land on f5. Rook will just demolish black's queen. I don't see. The thing is, you can more or less put the king wherever you would like, but it will not be safe. Well, maybe if you manage to get it in here and a rook on g6, you'll be more or less safe, but otherwise you'll just be hunted down. And if the king tries to run, knight comes in, and here he just loses. He had to play rook a7 or something, but it's not funny. Queen h5 is coming here, and yeah, not funny at all. He played h5 to avoid the queen h5 or queen g4, and then came rook takes d5, and yeah. And this was an interesting example of the breakthrough d5. We see the end of the game. A young Boris Spassky. It was played in 1949. It was in Leningrad, when the city was still named Leningrad. Check, take, and take. And there are 2 threats in the position. Queen g7, checkmate, and knight e7, picking up the queen. You cannot meet both threats, so black resigned. This was a very fast game. So what did black do wrong? Well, he did this move. Was already suspicious because it doesn't quite look right. And then he did this move, and then he did this move, and then it was all over after d5. And it looks so strange that you can play d5 even though black has almost all his army trained at this square. But it just goes to show why Nimzowitsch said that you have to block the d-pawn before you destroy it. Block it so it won't move, so you won't get something like this happening to you. And this is something everybody who's playing either white with the isolated queen pawn or black against the isolated queen pawn should be wary of. Watch that pawn. If it can move, you have to calculate. If it's even as a pawn sacrifice, it can be very dangerous because it unleashes all the power of white's pieces when this d4, d5 break happens. This was GM Talks. I hope this small but instructive lesson found you in a good place, and I hope you will be able to employ it in your games in this structure. Thank you for watching. The Rook Lift is a devastating weapon for white in the isolated queen pawn position. or for black if it's black who's got the isolated queen pawn. We are continuing the series on mastering the isolated queen pawn position, very important structure that arises in a variety of openings. This is GM Talks. I'm your host, Sune Berg Hansen, Danish Grandmaster and National Coach. We're going to see two games where white is successful with the Rook Lift. So let's get going. It's an old game. The first one is from 1976, and it's Miles versus, Keen versus Miles. Keen. And let's go into it. This is the symmetrical English and E3, and we go into an semi-Taurus structure where he took here. You can take with the pawn here as black, and then white would be playing against the isolated queen pawn, and black would have it. Instead, Miles chooses to take with the knight. And we are now in the semi-Taurus, or which is the echo code is D42, but it can also arrive in the Caro-Kann Panov, and I think that's the most common occurrence that it comes from there. Castle, all these moves are normal. Rook E1, as we discussed earlier, white would like his rooks on D1 and E1. And knight F6. I think the theoretical best move here is this move followed by knight here. And this is supposed to be almost equal. I would prefer to have white, but it's not bad for black. He's very solid, and you can play it this way. Knight F6 is a different way, and it's known as rather dangerous. Bishop D5 is not considered the best move. The best move is probably A3 in this position, followed by Bishop C2 and Queen D3, threatening D5 without playing Bishop D5, and it might go to H6 directly. We discussed this a little bit earlier in a previous video on the isolated queen pawn positions. Bishop D5 cannot be bad, of course. Knight B4, I don't really like this move. It's sometimes it's good, but white's plan is always to go A3 at some point anyway, so the knight will be kicked. So of course it's nice that the bishop is after this move you will not lose your white squared bishop. That's, by the way, very important. That the bishop is kicked with the rook here, but it's temporary, and at the same time black gives up all the pressure on this pawn. B6, knight E5, and also gave away this square for the knight. Bishop B7, and here we see a different problem with having the played knight B4. Rook E3, the Rook Lift, and in general, as a rule, white is black should be extremely careful about allowing the rook to get to the king side. The thing is, it's a little bit like you're putting a big cannon in front of something and just blowing away, and it's very easy for black to get blasted away. For instance, already here you can lose in a second, like here, because it says boom and queen and rook are coming and you are mated, basically. So Rook E3, don't allow this, and that's also why I don't like knight B4, because at the moment black is already in some sort of trouble. This rook is coming here, and it will bring really serious fire. Already you're threatening to take on F6 on H7, so there's serious problems here. Knight C6, you just take F6 and H7, and rook Queen H5 and rook H3, and it's mate. Okay, I should probably show that. So something like this. Boom, 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 and you're finished, right? So it's very dangerous. Don't allow that. Don't allow the rook to get to the king side. It will be too dangerous. So G6 had to prevent the take on H7. Rook D3. And one of the things with this is that it prevents knight H5 due to this move. Boom, and here, and it's mate. So already black is under serious pressure, and black should not allow the rook to get to g3, and white should try to get a rook to the king side. This is a very important rule. And bishop comes here, rook e8, a3, pushing the knight away, knight c6, makes sense. Trying to exchange pieces, we saw earlier that's what you really want. But here, white is too strong. There's too many pieces on the king side. The only one who's not participating on the king side is this rook. And so it's no surprise that he can just blast through. Take, take, take. And basically white is winning here. And we see very important little move. Don't be caught up with, there is queen d3, there is knight e5, queen c2. It's also annoying that after knight e5, d takes knight e4, the queen is pinned here. But queen b1 avoids this problem. This one is gone. Black could resign here. He's simply made it. It will not be able to defend this. And this just really shows why you should not allow the rook to get to d3. Take, and yeah. And of course, already we see that white has won a pawn, or 2 pawns, I think, 2 pawns, and have a devastating attack. And of course, yeah, this is so this was a nice little game, and it was funny because Keane and Miles were competitors and competing about who will be the first English Grandmaster. I think actually Miles won that race, but he's dead now, and Keane is not playing. He wrote some chess books. They were rather good actually, and then he started to write some rather bad books. Anyway, he was doing it with left hand, or what you call it. Okay, let's see another example. This was instructive, right? Don't allow the rook to get to the king side if you're black, and try to get the rook to the king side if you're white. So, next game is Pal Benko against Miroslav Filip from Hochevent in 1970. And they have an Queen's Gambit accepted, which is often leads to isolated queen pawn positions. A4. This has ups and downsides. It gives away this square, but it prevents b5. And b5 is rather nice for black to have. We know that from Meran, and also here's the Queen's Gambit. So, but giving away this b4 square is of course quite a high price to pay. In general, with the isolated queen pawn, you would prefer the pawn to be on a3, so black does not have the b4 square. Queen e2. This is all mainline theory. And I think here you can actually take with a knight, and that's rather dangerous. But this is also not bad. And all these moves are normal. Knight b4, knight e5. And here black makes an instructive mistake. And it's no doubt it's a very clear mistake. He plays knight b d5. I think bishop d7 is the main line, going for bishop c6. Notice that rook, bishops and knights are more of the same value here, unlike in most other positions where you tend to like the bishop a little bit more. In isolated queen pawn positions, knights are rather good. They are very good at blockading and attacking and so on, because the structure can often be fixed and giving the knight outpost, which knights like. Knight b d5 is definitely wrong. I think you can play bishop d7 or knight f d7. And this is wrong due to, and you probably guessed it, yeah, that's a big problem. The rook lift. Black didn't prevent the rook lift, and it's coming to a king near you, and it's gonna hurt a lot here. We already see that this is the cannon sitting in front of the king. And the king said, okay, I move. And the rook said, I move. And now it's already clear that black is in serious trouble here. Bishop e8 is a way to defend, and black is better defended on the king side than long. But due to this rook, white will always have serious threats on the king side. So this is already threatening here, and black can't take because of queen h5. So g6 is forced. Bishop h6. Rook e1. White has all the pieces into the game. Bishop g5. Nasty pin here. Notice the ultimate goal is of course the king. Attacking this knight again. And threatening. There is a X-ray effect here. So black is threatening this, white is threatening these things. So the queen will either have to move or you play queen rook d8, but doesn't look that good. And there's of course always ideas like queen h4 threatening bishop takes f6, queen b6, and white has really gotten happy with the rook lift. So here comes another rook. And that already threatens to take on f6 and take on h7 and play rook h3 check and queen h7 6 mate. You want to see? And I think you don't need this bishop, so even this is not a problem. And here, no matter what he does, you come with this, and it's winning. And also, it's the same with this. It's even worse, because now the king has less space, so it's made earlier. So h5, weakening the king side even further. And of course this knight is a problem, so push back the queen. It has to go somewhere, but it has to keep this under control. Notice that there's always the bishop here. So queen back and g4, also giving some air for the king. And here, this move, and yeah, well, the rest is simple. You're gonna take, and you're gonna take here, and it's gonna be made very quickly. So black resigned, and that was a rather elegant example of also the rook is hanging here of the rook lift, because white did 2 rook lifts. But so as a general rule, the rook lift is a very, very powerful attacking idea. You should try to get it in when you're having an isolated queen pawn, and you should definitely try to avoid the rook from coming to near your king when you're defending against the isolated queen pawn. I hope you liked this video. This was GM Talks. Thank you for watching. Understanding the isolated queen pawn positions, I think it's essential if you want to have success at chess. It's one of those kind of positions that can arise in any kind of openings, almost any kind of opening, and you have to play really weird setups to avoid this altogether. So why not just learn it and get success with both white and black in position with an isolated queen pawn. It's well, let's get into it. Today we're going to look at a game from a very recent game from the AIM Chess. It's an internet rabbit game, but the players are so strong that it doesn't really matter. They're probably playing better than I am when I'm with full time control. So it doesn't. It's not detecting anything from this setup or this game. Okay, let's get into it, and I'll try to explain white's perfect setup. White is Vladislav Artemayev, a young upcoming Russian player, and black is Levon Aronian, who are just recently switched to the US and is having a good time on the chessboard. At least he's doing pretty well. This is the so-called Rogozin system, and after E3 we transpose into the Nimzo-Indian. C5, that's interesting, and here white plays an interesting move. C takes D5. That's not the most common move. The most common move is bishop D3 in this position, and I think maybe that's also the best move. And here, if black were to take on d4, we would transpose into a Caro-Kann panel variation, which arrives from e4 c6. But that's not what happened. a3, he takes, and go back. And we have a typical queen pawn position with the pawn on d4, which is isolated and weak, but it also gives a lot of room to maneuver for white. He has free development all over the board, and is controlling, like I talk about a lot, all the 4 squares here, and black is only controlling 3 squares, and then we are fighting over the 5th square where white is controlling e5 and black is controlling d5 and so on. The thing here is black in general would love to have this bishop here on this square, because it defends the king, and it attacks the pawn on d4, making any kind of attacks against h7, as we will see in the game. It's not going to happen with the pawn on d6 and bishop on d7. b6, very normal. Black wants to put the bishop here where it is. Oops, I keep doing that. So where it controls the center, and in general it looks good on b7. Queen e2, connecting the rooks. Rook ad1, and this may be a little bit surprising to some players, that you're taught often that you should put the rooks on open file like this one. But in this position, the rook belongs on d1 and e1. In general, white is not going to play on the queen side, and he's looking for sometimes pushing this one. And in general, he needs defense for the pawn on d4. So you want, in this structure, in general, as a general rule, it almost always applies, you want your rook on d1 and e1. Okay, rook c8. This is also normal. Rook fe1. And this position is very interesting. And black is basically losing the game in like 2 moves from here. He has to be very careful. White is getting close to his ideal setup, where he will put the bishop here, and put the queen on this diagonal as well, and attack here. The bishop will probably go to d5, and white will have very active pieces, a lot of firepower aiming toward the black king. So black really has to be careful here, and the counterplay is not so easy to get going. So one move I would suggest here is maybe something like this. The idea is to control this square and trying to sort of exchange some pieces. You might be threatening this, but this is not very likely. But this is definitely an idea, and you're opening for this bishop here, so nothing bad will happen. One of the things black really have to be careful is that if white can get some of the heavy pieces to the king side, maybe some kind of a rook lift. I'm gonna make it red, something like this, and suddenly with the rook also joining the attack will be very, very strong. So it's essential not to allow the heavy pieces to get to the king side. So knight a5 here is probably the best move. Queen c7, and he's probably looking maybe to do something like this, maybe, and have some ideas when knight takes d4 and so on. But it's seldom it works. And bishop d5 and rook fd8, and that's probably too aggressive. He's attacking this pawn, but I think his rook belongs on e8. He was already in trouble here, I think. Queen c7 was already a mistake. Bishop b1. Okay, so white is basically getting ready for something like this and attacking here. When black plays d6, white will go something like, oops, I'm making the rules in reality here. So let's go back. And black is under a lot of pressure. We already see that almost all the white pieces are aimed towards the king side, and black is, well, what are the rooks doing here? So something like knight sacrificing itself on f7 is also in the air. So black is, I think, already busted here. Knight a5 is it's too late, and knight e5. And here black is already threatening something like white is threatening knight takes f7. This is a big problem in general. So what to do here? This is not easy. Something like you would love to do, like something like this. Then white will probably go queen e4. Oh, no, he's not going queen e4. He's doing this move. And something like this is always a total disaster for black. This is always totally lost. A line could be something like this. We see the rook lift here, check, and after this comes check and checkmate. And this is a very standard attack, and something you should definitely be careful about with black. So don't allow bishop takes a7, queen h5, and queen takes f7. Did you hear me, Aronian? Because the problem is white black is in serious trouble here. He could play something like this to defend f7, but then comes queen d3, attacking here on h7. So g6 is forced, and bishop a2, and this is a very, very common move in this structure. White, whenever there is the chance to go here with the bishop after g6, that's what black will do. White will do. Then what black is basically threatening here is something like, and white is threatening, is bishop h6 when the rook goes, knight f7, and bishop takes e6. And and it could even be mate. So black is in serious trouble. The queen might also go here. Like I said earlier, heavy pieces on the king side is a big problem for black. So here's a general rule. When black goes g6, you want the white square, this bishop here, the red one, on this diagonal, a2 to g8. Then f7 will be weak because bishop h6 is in the air, and also it's hard to get rid of a knight on g5 because it will weaken the pawn structure horribly. So black is in serious trouble here. There's nothing funny at all, and he plays queen d6, covering here, but then he walks into a typical attacking idea. So white to move here. It's white to move. What would you do? And we see it probably quickly. I don't know. I'm sure Artemayev would have seen it in a bullet game. Bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and boom, check. And black is already busted. We can see he goes with the king, but of course it's hopeless. Anyway, let's just see it. The queen comes in, check here, and I think the easiest is probably rook d3, and just rook h3, and you can try the same defense as before. It'll be the same mate, and I don't think there's any way you can defend this. This is just over. So that was if he took the bishop, so he had to go. And of course, queen h5. This is a total disaster for black. Lost a vital pawn, and the attack goes on. It doesn't stop. Bishop e4, bishop a6, back. Knight's coming. White has a pawn more and an attack, and the black king is in serious trouble. So he could resign here. He goes down in flame. Bishop takes. It doesn't take long. This is a typical sacrifice, and this is what you should be looking out for with black. That they will sacrifice something, because your position is falling apart. and knight comes in. Rook might also have joined the attack, but knight is easier, and okay, that's a bit sad though that it has to end this way. But okay, and of course there's no reason to change. Let's count the pawns. There's 3 pawns for black. There's 6 pawns for white, and black's king is not out of the danger yet. So check, and the attack will continue in the And here he resigned, losing something. I think he loses the rook, or whatever. Anyway, but this was very interesting point, and the critical position was this one, where black really had to understand that he was already in serious danger of falling under a very strong attack. White's attack is in general very strong when he has his positions, the ideal positions, with the rook on d1, rook on e1, all the pieces out, and bishop on this diagonal and ready to swing to the other diagonal. This bishop here on d3 is a very important piece for white. It attacks all the important things. The thing you want to attack is basically here, and that's a lot of help. And also when you have a black pawn here, it's very helpful to have this bishop. So this was interesting to see that the Aronian's sense of danger didn't include this kind of attack, or maybe he was just not being careful because he had to play fast and play queen c7 rather quickly. Anyway, these kind of positions are rather dangerous for black, and I would not recommend them in general. They are too difficult to play. White has a lot of initiative, and even when things are not going well, he can usually just play d5 and get rid of the pawn, and it's a draw. This was DM Talks with another in the IQP section. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Isolated queen pawn positions. We have had several videos with this topic, and it is a very important topic. If you want to become a strong chess player, you have to master these structure. You have to know what's going on. You have to be able to play both with the isolated d pawn and against the isolated d pawn. So today we're going to look at a slightly different structure. This is the one that often arises from king pawn openings, like for instance the French Taras is a very common thing, but it can also come from the Petrov and many other openings, and it is a good thing to master. Let's just quickly dive into it, and here we're going to see actually Farrago against Velikov is getting it in a Queen's Gambit, in old style Queen's Gambit here, and it starts out as a Slav and then it turns into a Queen's Gambit declined orthodox variation, a little bit passive set up by black. This was back in 1983 in Bulgaria, and they still played like this. I think they can still play like this today, but they would probably not play c6. I think the Kramnik system is with a6 instead, because you want to go c5 in one go. All very common, and this I think is known as the Capablanca maneuver or something, and if white was to go knight e4, it would be the Aljechin method or something. Anyway, this is common. Take here is also common, and we can get this in slightly a little bit like this in the Lasker variation of the Queen's Gambit, but there black's pawn is on h6. I actually think it's probably to black's advantage to have the pawn on h7, because it makes the white squares less weak. e5. Another setup is to go with b6 and bishop b7 and play c5 and try to equalize that way. e5 is also not bad, but here I think black does something wrong. he takes on d4, and it looks natural to transpose into an isolated queen pawn position, but it's not good. So a better move would have probably been e4 and or rook e8 or a6 or something like that. But this I don't like, because here we get this structure, and the typical part of it is that the E file is completely open, and the C file that used to be the one that was open in the earlier example we have seen on the queen's isolated queen pawn position is now blocked with the pawn here. That means this square is slightly more in danger, but also means that black's white squared bishop has an easier job getting out. It's much easier to get into the job, and it will usually land somewhere along this way here, and not on this square here. So this is very different, but also due to the lack of pawns on the surrounding the black king, white has more chances of building up a quick attack in these positions. So they are more dangerous. By the way, you know, if you know the French, you know that when you get this structure as black, you usually have your knight here. The knight is much better on this square, much better on this square. It can jump into this very, very nice square and into this very nice square. And especially this square is great because it's very hard to get rid of it. And if you take, it's not like you will have symmetrical pawn structure like in the with the open C file, but here you will get a pawn majority that might roll and so on. Anyway, queen d6. Getting out of the open file, and we see that white's rook here looked a little bit weird before, but now it looks good because it can swing to the king side and start an attack. And already here black is in some sort of trouble after knight g5. Very annoying move. If for instance he probably thought that I can just exchange queen, but the thing is, if you do this, the initiative will go on in the ending, and this is coming, and this is in trouble. And even though you land a knight on d5, white will still penetrate with the rooks and get some serious initiative. So the exchange queens is not an option. And by the way, white only has one weakness, and if that goes, okay, he's lost a pawn, but that's maybe not the end of the world. Usually he will have very active pieces. So the stakes are higher for black because his king is in danger. Knight f6, covering against the threat here of checkmating the queen. Rook f3, renewing the threat on h7 by introducing rook takes f6 into the equation. And please notice that h6 does not help. White still take the knight. Okay, so g6 is forced. Then comes this move, and the pressure is piling up. We got already 3 pieces on this one, and we have the X-ray effect from the rook on the knight. So, and we will see that knight comes in here, blocking here, and this is usually a part of the defensive strategy for black in this structure, is to block d5, avoiding any kind of things. Especially the bishop on this diagonal can be very strong, so it's nice to have it out of the game, but it doesn't really change anything. Please notice that to get rid of the knight, you always have to weaken your structure. But here, white has a simple way of playing this, attacking the queen. The queen will have to go, take. You can't take with the queen because of knight f6 check, so you have to take the pawn, check, king g7, and here, very strong move, already introducing a very, 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 very unpleasant queen e5. What to do about that? You can't really move the queen to cover because of knight e8 check, And notice when the queen is here and the king is there, then you're threatening something like mate in 3 moves with knight h5 or knight e8 or things like that. So black is already completely busted here. He played h5, queen e5, trying to run away, but there is no hiding here, and white has an easy combination. By the way, please notice that in these kind of positions, when you have the initiative, these kind of small combinations, they flow naturally. It's like they're sitting in your wrist. And so you should not be surprised that it's possible to mate people very quickly in things like this. Here, white has knight takes h5. You cannot, of course, take with the king because of the knight is threatened. What about if you take with the pawn? Then comes rook f6, and king and queen and rook is mating the black king in nice fashion. Okay, black could take on f6, but that's of course hopeless. So steady played here, hoping for, but there's just check, and well, king here. You could take here, but then you're mated in 3 moves with queen h7 and 2 moves in queen h7 and h4 and rook g3. And here black resigned. After something like this, he is mated in, I think, 6 moves or something. So this was a nice little win for Ivan Farago, who's not really an attacking player, but this kind of thing he could do. And please notice that the initiative was very strong, and it didn't seem, where did black go wrong here, right? He opened the position slightly too early, and then he was just boom, gone. And this is what happens, so you should be very careful. It has to be, especially in isolated queen pawn position, as the defending side, please be very careful. Their attack is very strong, so be careful. Okay, let's see one more example. It's a classic example from Tilburg in 1983. It's 2 of the giants of the past, Vaganyan against Hübner, and I played both players. I think it was all draws. I think I played both of them 2 times, and it was all draws. Anyway, they're really strong, and back then they both had 26-20, and this is their Queen's Gambit accepted, and this is one of the ways that you can get this pawn structure. Here, I think, by the way, black is nowadays preferring a setup with bishop d6, but still today this position is considered slightly better for white, and especially due to the fact that you get your bishop to c4 immediately. So you have such fantastic fast development to all the good squares that it's kind of annoying to play with black. This is, of course, a weakness. Here it is a weakness, but when will it count? Will it ever count? Will the activity not just transform it into something else? Usually it will. Anyway, they didn't know so much back then, so this was probably clearly better for white was not known. And we already see that this knight is, of course, much better here than it is on this lousy square where it's forced in the terrace defense. And black is developing. He's getting ready to play here and control this square. But just controlling this square doesn't change the fact that white has very active pieces, easy development, and attacking chances against usually something over here that could get blasted away. And that's also nice. The e-file is open, also means that there's not much blocking going on. Even sometimes when there's a bishop here, the rook can sometimes just take it. All this looks very standard. Okay, and it took white 11 moves to have more or less full coordination. Bishop g4 and queen d3. Just getting ready to play this move next, and getting out of the pin here. And what black takes now, the problem is that this bishop is hanging here, so I'm not really sure I like bishop d4. I would probably have played knight f d7 or something, trying to exchange some pieces. You took here, take, and please notice you can't take d4 due to this problem. Here, trying to exchange a lot. Knight out here, and here is a crucial moment in the game. So we can easily see that, yeah, white does have a weak pawn here, for sure. There's no denying it. It's a weak pawn. It's an isolated d pawn, and it's blocked by this pawn. But that's all the bad things you can say about white's position. The rest is all good. He has a fantastic bishop pointing down like a laser into black's kingside position. He has a great knight. He has definitely more space. He has open file for the rook, and please notice it's not so easy for black to get into this file due to the pressure on f7. So what to do here? Well, the biggest plus white does have is the e file. So here it comes, rook to e5, taking control over d5. That was not black's plan, that white was able to simply stop knight d5 because it loses a pawn. You might lose that pawn, but it's a lost position if you do. It might be technically difficult, and lesser players than, for instance, Karpov or something might not win it, but in general, it should be won, and it's not much fun for black. Okay, so knight goes here away from this square. Rook here, covering pawn, and still getting ready for the other rook to come. And please notice there's tremendous pressure on black's position. He's calling the pieces to the kingside, but knights are not really great defenders in these things, because this bishop is just the best light squared bishop you could have. Covering the pawn, getting ready, and something like this is definitely on the cards now, just to get further ahead. Queen a5, and one move is h4, but then knight f6. Another move is to say, okay, sometimes you want to go d5, but here it would probably lead to some sort of mass exchanges, and you might still have a slight advantage. But on the other hand, how's black going to develop? We see this pressure on this weak square here, and it's not going away. It's not going away. So why not bring more pieces into the game? Rook e3, strong move. The idea is very simple. Going knight e4 and just putting more pressure on f7. And there's nothing to attack here. By the way, this is one of the main strengths of a player like Vaganyan. He's extremely good at coordinating his pieces so they go to active squares and play together in harmony. Okay. Knight is coming. And h4 is coming. This is a nice multi-purpose move. First of all, it's going to do some serious damage when it travels up the board. Second of all, it gives the king down here some air, and there will be no back rank mate, which we are always afraid of. Black didn't fancy taking queen h5 and rook h3. It's also, I think, losing on the spot. Something like this is not possible. You will die very, very, very quickly. So played a6, but that's not good either. Then comes the really unpleasant here, queen g4, and it carries with it a serious threat. Queen takes g6 due to this pin here. Please notice this pin. This is also why black cannot play something like that. He played king h8, getting out of the laser bishop. h5. And please notice that attacking players, they never just try and see if they can take a pawn on f7 and see if that's good enough or something. If you can continue the attack and it looks promising, that's what you do. And here, of course, it looks very promising because where's that knight going? It's not clear that it has any good squares. And after this move, how is Black going to defend this this pawn here? Rook takes rook d8, bishop takes f7 is not fun at all. He played d5, which is like chess without a helmet. Of course, Hübner knew that he was dead lost here, just hoping something would turn up. And what to do here with white? Yeah, bring the last pieces into the game. These guys are not going anywhere, so why not just wait for the killer blow before finishing? And here you take this under control, so you're starting to threaten this move. You're also getting ready to maybe do some serious intrusion here. Rook here, rook here, and suddenly this works to white advantage, that there's much power here. And here I kind of like the way Vaganyan plays this, because he's just improving the position, keeping activity, making it very easy. And after this move, it's all over. Black is lost. He's losing in one move. I don't know if you can see it. I'll give you a small chance to show that you can make a combination like Vaganyan. Anyway, this game was very instructive in my way. It's also a very good attacking technique by white, but also showed the danger in black's position when the e-file is open. That the attack simply is stronger. The attack is stronger, so you have to be even more careful. Another thing that is it's probably easier to simplify the position somewhat in these positions. But anyway, I think this isolated d pawn, if you get the knight to this square instead of like in the terrace where you get it to e7, I think you're at least equal most of the time. Anyway, we want to see the final move. Boom. That's it. We see that, okay, if he takes here, we simply take back. I would take here with checkmate. It's probably pretty good. And if he takes here, check, hitting the after something like this, we count the pieces and we see that white is one bishop up. So this was an isolated queen pawn position video. I hope you liked it. It's part of a series that will enable you to master this structure. So please pay attention and watch more of the videos, please. Thank you for watching. In the series on the isolated queen pawn position, we have reached the final, I think. It is two games that made a big impression on me when I was a young man. It was the good old Vasily Smyslov, who was a world champion in way back, and suddenly in '83 he won the semi-final against Sultan Ripley. That was at that time a rising Hungarian star. We thought he could be maybe even a world championship contender, but then he just faded away sort of into the drawing land of a little bit too timid players. I think Leko suffered the same fate. Not that they're not strong and good players with a great understanding. It's just that they sort of lost ambition and then it's over. Anyway, Smyslov, he won two great games in this semi-final in the isolated queen pawn position, and it's just a marvelous display on the white potential with activity and how to sort of do that. So let's get into it. This is the first game. It's game 5, let's let the moves do the talking. Smyslov started with d4. By the way, Smyslov is of course very well known as a great master of the endgame, but he is also a pretty good middle game player. He has a very good sense of activity and coordinating the pieces well and so on. So you will find a lot of harmony in the way Smyslov plays chess, and I kind of like that. I'm a sort of a secret fan of Smyslov. Anyway, this is the so-called Semitaras. Or I think in Irv's old book it's called half classical Queen's Gambit. The main move here is e4. This is what they usually do, but Smyslov plays e3, and here black has had some results with take and knight with this move. This is what Vincent Keimer had some pretty good results with as black, but I think Carlsen might have refuted it with a great attack. He just plays Rook b1 here, I think, and did great in a game against I don't remember against who, but it was a great game. I think I have shown it here on GM Talks. Anyway, that's not the main line. The main line is move is knight c6, bishop here, castle. And White's problem is that he would love for black to take here and take back, but black doesn't have to do that. So you can wait. Taking on d5, black will get a nice isolated queen pawn position. So White is at a dilemma. If he plays queen e2, he will have a worse version. If he plays bishop d2, he will have a much worse version, and so on. And rook e1, black will of course not take on d4, but probably play something like b6 or something. So here the best waiting move is a3, but this is nowadays considered to be not very topical. The move a3 is often useful to take away this square from the knights, because White often, as we've seen, want to do a battery on this diagonal. And now black takes, and I think they've started to take on c3 here, saying that the move a3 is not good. Anyway, bishop f6 cannot be that bad. And this was the first game, and here Smyslov plays queen c2. And sort of usually you would like to have the piece are organized differently, but the move queen c2 is sometimes played, and here it allows black to play h6, which cannot be that bad, and White sort of covers this in a slightly artificial way. Queen b6, attacking it yet again, but that is a little bit sort of if black cannot win d4, maybe it's not the best move. The thing is, after this move, black doesn't really threaten to take on d4 due to knight a4, and for instance, oops, no, that would be silly with the queen on b6. No, something like this. I think both. Of course, White could take on d5, but I think even this is a problem, and this bishop is hanging. Anyway, so bishop c4, smart move, and as we've seen, the bishop often accelerate between these two. This diagonal on and this diagonal, and it is of course White's good bishop, this one, and here we see that with the move played h6, White would love to have the queen and the bishop trading places, and that's actually what he started with bishop c4, rook d8. And here comes a slightly weird move, but it's not a bad move. I think he was afraid of something energetically, like knight b3 or something, so he played this move. And after this move comes the plan, queen e4, and we see that White is already happy here, but black is not. He's very solid at the moment, and I think it's still interesting. Maybe he should not allow the queen to go to h7. I would not have allowed that. But bishop a4 is very principled. and bishop b5. And black probably thought that, okay, my king is very safe here. I got complete control over this square, so I got no problems. The problem is that after this, here, it turns out there are some problems here. And also this knight is rather good on d3, taking away a lot of nice squares. And the idea of trapping the queen, of course, black's idea was something like this, and here, and rook h8, and whoa, there goes the queen. But it's not possible as it comes, because this was a definite mistake. And after this, black is already busted. This was a huge mistake. He had to take on e5, and of course, with the active king queen on h7, you are a bit scared as black for sure. But maybe it's tenable. It's not instant lost. But after this move, white wins. And how does he do that? He plays. Can you see it? Boom. Here it comes. Of course, most of you can probably see that taking here is not good, because it opens for the queen to checkmate here, right? So you can't take. Okay, so that was a pawn gone. But what about this move? And then white just keep the pressure on. He could take back, but keeping the pressure on is pretty cool. And the thing is, there are some tricks in the position that black probably didn't see, that he thought that, okay, and this threat is of course huge at the moment, or even this move could also be a bit problematic, and why black is close to getting mated. So but this doesn't help much, because you can't take on h5 due to this discovered check here, and white will win the queen. So knight f5 looks natural. Knight takes here, cannot be taken due to the pin, and this is a crucial moment. I thought Ripley has probably thought that this is okay, because he can't really play queen h8, king e7, queen takes d7 due to rook g8, and I will have a very favorable exchange of two rooks and a knight for a knight, a queen and a knight. So this looks kind of nice, and also this structure sucks, but the dynamics is the problem. And that is the problem. What to do now? There's sort of stopping everything from defending here and putting extra pressure on this one. This one move is in the air in a lot of variations. He took here and check. And this is a nice position for white. So when you realize you cannot take here, because you could take on f6 and or rook g8 or something, then you know that, okay, something will have to happen, and that's of course this move. That could even happen after queen takes d7, and this is just winning. The problem is now the queen is in a sort of here, so it comes another little nice move, d6, and here we see that we have one pawn and rook versus rook, and then queen versus knight and rook. And that's no problem for the white queen, especially since black has a very bad king. If this king was totally safe and the knight could sit on the f-file somewhere and being annoying for white's king, then it would be fine for black. But as it is, he just have a very bad king, so he will not be able to coordinate anyway. And Smyslov is very good at destroying people's coordination. This is one of the things he does. Of course, playing actively here makes sense. h4 taking away this square, and of course defending the pawn. And this is yeah, check e5 and a slight combination. Of course, when you're up material, it's usually a good idea to exchange pieces, not pawns. Pieces, not pawns. And here you get one rook off, and only one rook left. And here white black resigned. A nice game by Smyslov, and a bit surprising for Ripley. Ripley was considered the big favorite before the match, so it was kind of interesting that he just lost this game, and then he couldn't win the next one with white, and then we'll get a new game here. This is game 7, and both, of course, were ready for this. This was Ripley's preparation. By the way, it is a bit annoying for white to face this kind of line due to the fact that it's very concrete. If you don't get anything, black will have easy development and no weaknesses. So it's sort of put the pressure on you. Here, of course, black can take with the pawn and get a very bad version of the terrace. White plays bishop g5 and is clearly better immediately. But this is, of course, the main move. And Ripley is a sort of natural Hungarian player. That means in the Polish tradition, no weaknesses, good development, playing healthy, good chess. They are very usually, I think Richard Rapport is a slightly different type of player, and also Judy Polgar, because most Hungarians, they're really good technicians in the Polish tradition. And we have the same stuff here, and bishop f6. And last time we saw that Smyslov played queen c2, but it was not that difficult to improve on the black game. So here he goes bishop e4. That is sort of a strange move, but it has slightly the same idea. You get maybe play this move. You also put pressure on this one. And the thing is, when you have a lot of pressure here, you can always decide to exchange on d5, changing the structure forever. And if you can do that at a favorable moment, that's nice. For instance, sometimes b6 is not very good due to you just take it, and then he has weakened his queen side, and the c file with the knight here wanted to have support from the pawn. So usually black goes here, which is of course very solid, getting this pawn, square under control, but also taking away the pressure on this file. Anyway, the black setup is kind of harmonious. 95, and here I think black should probably play this move. This is not very well known, but just going back, and if you take, then the problem with the d pawn is just as big as the problem with the c pawn. So black will have fine play, and here I think this move is probably best. So I think knight c6 is a much better move. He played d6, and I don't like that much. I don't think the d6 setup, and I think there was something they realized after this match, that the setup with g6 and knight c7 probably is not a good fit, because white, look at the white pieces, they are so active, and the white rooks will have excellent scope. So white is getting all the activity, and all black has to show for it is one little pawn here that's not even attacked. So it's not like white's initiative can just go on without any problems. Play bishop d7, that was necessary. Rook c1, and in general, in these kind of positions, there's not much to see on the c file for white. In the c file is usually not very interesting, because it's usually there's a knight and a rook and something, and if you put a rook on the c file, it will probably be exchanged. And as we all know, exchanging pieces is not what you want when you're playing with the isolated queen pawn. You want attack, you want free play, but you don't want an ending where you'll have to defend your weak pawn. b6, and I think that is now considered a mistake. because after this move, and this is strange, I just said that exchanges was good for black. So how come that? And you'd say even the white squared bishop, this great piece is getting exchanged. The problem is, it's not like Fischer said. It's not what goes. It's what remains, and what remains is this one against this one. And this guy here is much better than the colorblind bishop on c8 that you can probably exclude from the game if you play well with white. And actually the pawn here on d4 is a help for white, who will play on the black squares and therefore needs support there. And of course the active rook, if there was no active rook, then the position would instantly be good for black. But now there is an active rook, and it's really annoying to have this pressure on this diagonal here, and this bishop here is finding it hard to find a way. Bishop b7, introducing a slight threat here on g2, but attacking and defending is nice. Please notice that this is immediately disqualification due to this problem. So now black cannot move the pawns at all. Rook a8. That was definitely not the plan. And rook d1 is a bit passive. Notice that black is not threatening this due to this is hanging. So rook e1 makes somehow more sense. But Smyslov was at the time actually rather old. He was, I think he was 60 or something. And it's kind of impressive that he still had 2600 and he could play at this level and qualify. He was later eliminated by Kasparov in a match where he didn't have any chances. Kasparov was simply much better player, but it's still extremely impressive when a player like Smyslov actually managed to get this far. I think that's impressive. a5, h4, and this is of course a standard move. White's threat is very simple. You go here, take here, and then take here because of this pin. So it's really serious. At the same time, with h4, the king here gets some air. It can now escape a check on the back rank to h2. Rook c8, rook d7, attacking here, queen here. And it's all nice, and of course the ending is probably better for white, but probably not much. So why not go for the attack? There's still a lot to see here. Bishop c6 is a good move. The rook was very dominating here, and the queen was even not that that's relevant. So bishop c6, and here white makes a mistake, f3. Please notice that this move is not possible because white will go this move, and this ending here is of course very nice for white. So this is a small trick. And by the way, Smyslov's games are often full of these kind of tricks. It's very typical for the former world champion to have these kind of tricks sort of strewn out all over the board. Anyway, bishop c, f3, and here the trick actually doesn't work. So here he should play h6, and we'll have a better rook ending. So that was you'll probably have to take on c6, and you'll get a pawn, but black will have active rooks, and it's probably a draw after h6. Notice that the old trick doesn't work because the rook is hanging. Instead he played queen f5, and now it's just lost. Rook a7, and the ending is a disaster if he takes here. He will never get this one away from here, and you will just yeah. These it's not that nice that with having this bishop on this square. So bishop here, and black goes for activity, And this move is a little bit weird. B4, I don't think it's necessary, but that's easy to say when you have a computer helping you. Rook E4. And this is what we see with the Smyslov. He has a simple plan. And what to do about that? He played h6, but it doesn't change anything. The plan is still here. Just doing this, going on the dark squares. And here, Rook f4 is probably the easiest move. There's no kind of attack at all. But he played this move, and maybe, well, it's of course totally winning. Yeah, and also it's kind of a fun threat to have Rook takes d6 as a threat, but it does get a little bit messy. I wouldn't like this Rook d3. And why black does get some activity, and what you're afraid of is, of course, that somehow he managed to get to the king. He does do that, but it's not enough. And h3, and I think Smyslov kind of lost a little bit of control here, but still winning. h2, great move, highlighting this problem, and of course, there's this threat. Oops, not this one. This one with the rook here. h2, trying to get some counterplay. Check, and it better works because the king is really dead here on d7. So take and check, and don't. Actually, you could probably play this move. I think the computer believe is the best move, but I don't think many humans would play that. So I think this move makes sense. Just sacrificing the queen for 2 rooks after this move. And the problem, of course, is that this is completely out of play, and black's king is in much bigger danger than white's king. White has not given a check yet, but he will very soon. And after this move, and here, black actually resigned. I think the easiest way is to just do something like this and go all the way up here. And black's king will actually be he more or less made it very quickly after these moves. So this was Vasily Smyslov in the 1983 London candidate semi-final against the Sultan. Isolated queen pawn positions are a great thing to know as a chess player. You will get these kind of positions with both colors throughout your career, unless you play very weird openings. It is part of the Queen's Gambit, accepted, Caro-Kann, Panov attack, different kind of terrace variations and semi-terrace and so on. And understanding these positions and getting to know them and play them well is very important if you want to become a strong player. All grandmasters understand these positions very well. Today we will look at when white gets to add the queen to the attack. We have seen the Rook Lift, where you get to move the rook to the usually 3rd or 4th rank and adding power to the attack on the king. And today we're going to see that the queen is also a big thing for the attacker, and preventing the queen from coming to the queen side, the king side, can be very important. In this game from the it's a 30-year-old game, but it's kind of a classic, and it shows a lot of the most important themes in this structure. So let's get on with it. Maxim Glocki is white, and Limbit All, who's unfortunately is no longer with us, is black. And we have transposed into the so-called Panov variation or attack, or someone call it Panov-Botvinnik attack. and you can play this against the Caro-Can. And it's a serious opening, for sure. Knight c3, knight c6, and this is, I think, also at the moment the critical variation against the Panov. And white has usually two moves here: bishop d5, adding more pressure on d5, or knight f3, just developing. Bluggy plays c takes d5 first, knight takes, knight f3, and here the main move would be bishop g4, I think. And this is probably the best move in this position, getting the bishop out. It might sometimes lead to trouble on the white squares on the queen side, but in general you would love to have this bishop out before it's shut in. Instead he played e6. This is also a normal move in this position. And bishop d3, this is where you want your bishop, this square or this square. Here, from this diagonal, it attacks h7, which is of course important in when black castles king side, which he will generally do. Bishop b4. You could play, if you play bishop e7, is known as the semi-Taras variation. Bishop b4 is now also still in the Panov variation, because you don't usually get this. You can also get this from the Nimzo-Indian, actually. Bishop d2. Queen c2 is another line involving a pawn sacrifice. And castle, knight f6, maybe hitting here. a3, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back, and bishop e3, which is a little bit passive, you could say. But it's of course playable, and white gets to get his position. b6, black is planning to put the bishop here, and the bishop is in generally very good in this diagonal. It's also controlling the vital d5 square. We have seen earlier that the push d4, d5 is an important weapon in white's armor, or artillery, or what you call it. Rook e1, and we also seen that the ideal setup is with the rook on d1 and e1. That's the most aggressive, and whites generally go after the king. It is sometimes possible to actually attack on the queen side. We will see that in a later video in this series, but as a rule, white is more interested in the center and the king. And bishop c2. We also seen this move before. The idea is very simple: to go queen d3 and maybe d5 or bishop d5, and hitting down here with the battery. Knight a5, and that's probably wrong. That's probably a mistake, because after knight e5, and here maybe I think black should try and go back. Simply play knight c6 and ask the knight what it's doing, but it might play knight d4. I don't know. Anyway, the thing is, after rook c8, queen d3, there's some serious pressure here, and what black really want to avoid is the rook or the queen coming to the king side. This is something you're always afraid of, and putting the knight on a5 might have allowed that, because after queen c, and here whenever this battery comes, black should in general play g6. But here bishop h6 and queen h3 looks very scary. There's also, when for instance some like this here, sometimes this can be a big problem. But here I think white would just play queen a3 and threaten to take here, and if black takes back with the king, then queen takes e6 is checkmate. And this is a very common theme, so be wary of this. Queen c7, I think black is already in some trouble, because bishop d5, g6, and here comes the queen. And white's threat is very simple. He's threatening to play bishop h6 and knight takes f7, and it's very, very, very difficult to meet this. knight d5, bishop h6, bishop moves, let's just see it, and boom, and it's all over. This is a very nice and very common mate that you should be aware of. So after queen a3, black is already in very serious trouble, and also white is already, even though it's not threatening, it might be threatening something, but even something like this here is extremely unpleasant. White might be threatening something like this and here, and this is under attack, and how you're going to defend that, it's not very clear. So this is definitely almost unplayable for black. He tried knight d5 and bishop h6, and well, took here, but white can just take the exchange. There's no and that's the problem for black, that if he gets some serious compensation for the exchange, that would be nice, but he doesn't. White is attack is still going. The king here is in trouble, and the knight here is not doing anything. Queen takes, and here white has a strong move. This is also a common theme, and something you should be very clear about. When the queen is here, the knight takes f7 is almost always on the card with the knight on e5, because there's also the pawn on h7 that's hanging. And he had to take, because you don't want the knight to go back to d5, hitting e6 and h7. So take, rook 81, getting the last rook, threatening this check, and threatening here, and it's, well, it's not much fun. Queen f6, take, check, check, and this is smart, and this is a typical thing that happens here. Some like this is the problem, and rook takes e6. And, well, he went with the king, bishop f5, and we see that we have that even though material-wise black is okay, he's not okay, because the king will not survive this. And this knight that went on the rim is dim. Rook e3. Maybe go to d3 and d7, maybe go to g3. g3 is very annoying. e6, queen g8, adding more firepower. Still rook d3 might be on the card. Now there's also a check here. That's pretty unpleasant, and well, you can say that of course it's went wrong for black. So just one wrong move, knight a5, and the queen was somehow allowed to join the king side for an attack, and it became very strong, the attack. And black should definitely be very much on the lookout to avoid any of the heavy pieces getting to the king side, because the white attack will be too strong. Here, of course, it's, yeah, you could also resign. And there's a threat here, and there's a threat here, and, well, it's not much fun, right? So black resigned. And this was poor Limpid All, who suffered from a depression, who lost this game. So what did we learn here? We learned that getting the queen into the attack is a very serious threat that you should be afraid of when you're playing against the isolated queen pawn. You should definitely be on the lookout for this, because it will the attack will be too strong. As white, you are looking to get those pieces into the attack, especially the rook lift, but also getting the queen just to ace squares like this and here are really, really dangerous, and suddenly all kinds of sacrifices are looming over the black king. And if you go back, we see that here the queen is actually far away from the king side. So black should be preparing for it, and try to avoid it coming. Anyway, you could play rook e8 was a move that's interesting, queen d6 or something, but definitely avoiding knight e5 and queen coming to h3 or h4 would have been smarter. This was GM Talks with another episode in the isolated queen pawn structure. Thank you for watching. Beating the isolated queen pawn is the topic of this video today. We're gonna see Karpov using strategic exchanges, the principle of two weaknesses, and transformation of advantages to overcome Viktor the Terrible Korchnoi in a World Championship match game from 1981. This is a real classic. I think it's one of the must-know games. One of the things you simply have to have as part of your chess culture. So let's get on to it. This is one of my favorite games. Very instructive. Viktor is white, and we have flipped the board so we can be Karpov. And it's a Queen's Gambit declined. Bishop e7 is a refinement, avoiding the pure exchange variation where white has the option of putting the knight on e2. I probably talked a lot about that in the section on the Carlsbad structure. And we have it's a Queen's Gambit declined, and Rook c1 is aimed against what Karpov usually would do, b6. I think black can play b6 anyway, but since white played Rook c1, it might not be the best square for the rook in an isolated queen pawn position. So already here we see that the principles we outlined in an earlier edition about where to put the rooks might actually play a role already here on move 7, c5, and this is known as an equalizer. The thing is, white is use the tempo for Rook c1. That's not really helpful. So, and here comes an important moment in the game. I think if black plays something like b6, white is better here. He has more space. He has good attacking chances. Okay, h6. In general, you would love to have the bishop on this diagonal instead, because then you could sacrifice on h6 at some point. But also some sort of some battery here with the queen aiming to do something here is a clear plan for white. And when black has played h6, it's not so easy to repair the structure without weakening it too much. But here black plays a great move, and I think it was a novelty at the time, knight h5. That is a good move. Because what do black want in Queen's Gambit declined, or a isolated queen pawn position? Exchanges. That's what we've been talking about. In general, when you're defending against the isolated queen pawn position, you would like to exchange as much as possible of the pieces, not the pawns. In general, the pieces, the more pieces that goes, the weaker the d pawn becomes, and the fewer attacking chances white will have. The fewer attacking chances you will have. So the attacking chances are diminishing as the pieces disappears. Take. And here I think Viktor is already playing too passively. A good move could probably be something like this, and Rook e1, and trying to do maybe get some like a Rook Lift or something. White has to attack on the king side. He has nothing else. There's no other weaknesses. Otherwise, he could play d5 and aim for a draw. But Viktor was not the kind of guy who aimed for a draw. and bishop d7. And this is and white is not, black is not afraid to let this piece go. This bishop is not important as long as black controls d5. I think white should start to consider playing for a draw with something maybe like d5. Rook queen e2, and white is still hoping for some sort of attack. Normal move here, and here comes a really bad move by Victor. A really bad move. I think rook d1 or something, and we're still playing. And I think he should acknowledge that this rook is badly placed on c1, because it can only be exchanged by this one, and you don't really want exchanges when you're having a weak pawn on d4 that has no defender. And that's the problem with isolated pawns. They don't have any pawn defenders. They have to be defended by pieces, making them in general weak. So here Korsnay made a clear mistake, knight e4, and that's simply wrong, exchanging pieces. He's probably hoping to clear something. I think his plan was to clear something and get this bishop here, and then again there might be something down here, but it's not gonna happen. Bishop c6, rook takes c6, and here I think he realized that black can just play knight g6. Nothing's going to happen. There's no mate. There's nothing at all. And here he should take here, because white will not play. Black will not take back with the knight because of d5, and white is probably slightly better, or maybe even bishop c2. But he would take here, and I think these kind of structures in general, you have to be very careful. This bishop can easily become very bad. Anyway, he played rook c3, queen d6, covering everything, and this is an interesting move. Queen b1 and rook b6, just not allowing this exchange, just saying, okay, I would like to put all my pressure on this pawn. I'm not going to take here and allow your pawn to be defended. And well, here you can still play bishop c2 here, and you go g6, I think. And white is worse, but it's not a disaster. You might defend. The problem is, of course, the knight can defend, attack here, so white has to be ready to play d5. So you will have to go back with the bishop. It's not an ideal position, but you might be able to hold. But this move just makes no sense. I don't know what the point was. Anyway, and it seems like Victor just had a very bad day here, and he's preparing to triple the rooks. I'm not sure it's called an Aljechin cannon. I think the expression is a bit confused, and he goes back, and well, and I think Karpov realized here that he was clearly better, of course, because this pawn is just weak. The knight is better, but even though it's better, you still would like to exchange it, because after that, then black will simply put all the pieces on the. You put this one here, and then you play e5, winning a clear pawn because of the pin in the d file. This is a standard method. You just puts everything on the isolated pawn, and then you push your pawn and win the pawn because it can't take. So you block it, and then you destroy it, and creating a probably winning ending or close to winning ending. So everything is going to attack here, and it's clear that black is having a good time here. And the thing is, a guy like Karpov is really good at keeping the pressure for a long time. So he will do a little bit here, a little bit there, and eventually you will become frustrated and make a mistake, and then he will win easily. And here Karpov of course, I said, okay, I can defend this, but it's a hopeless position actually. It's very, very unpleasant. And okay, I can threaten your queen, and so what? And I'm not gonna defend anything. And we see here this setup, and we see that this is threatening here, and it's not so much fun. And here Korsnoi made another mistake, because at the moment, if he can keep his pieces active after he loses a pawn, if he keeps his pieces active after he loses a pawn, he has decent drawing chances. This is a normal thing. I lose one pawn, but then everything is fine. That's the good thing about isolated deep pawn. You only lose one if you lose them. If you have hanging pawns and you lose one, then you have an isolated pawn, and then you're probably going to lose that as well. Then you lost two pawns, and then you're definitely going to lose the game. So here, if White could somehow minimize the damage and only lose a pawn, and hopefully exchange queens and have a rook ending, he has decent drawing chances. Instead, Victor panics. He plays f4, and hereby he creates what we call a second weakness. And in general, it's a good thing to have the principle of two weaknesses. I think it was formulated by Alexander Arechin, is that you need two weaknesses to win, or to kill. And here, the second weakness, of course, this structure is not ideal, but the real weakness is, of course, White's king. That's now in serious trouble when the rooks are coming for it, and they are coming. Karpov doesn't hurry at all ever. He will just move around a little bit, and White is, of course, desperate to get some counterplay, and a5, and here it comes. Queen d5, great move. We see that this rook is not really in a good spot, and we're threatening this very unpleasant walk in, and also something like this, and here could be really, really, really unpleasant. There's also another idea, of course, he covers things, and e5, and this is what we call transformation of advantages. Black is having a clear structural advantage. He has initiative, he has a weakness to attack, but now he changes it into a direct attack. So he says, okay, it was nice knowing all your weaknesses here and there, but let's get going. Of course, now there's a very serious threat here, and followed by queen f1 mate. So we make that red, and this guy is in trouble. So he has to cover this file, and another threat is coming, queen here, and notice that from this square it's also eyeing this rook. So he's forcing it to here, allowing a deadly rook to enter on the second rank. And of course, it's with this kind of structure, you can only hope to survive if you can deliver some checks or exchange queens, and that's not possible. The queen will come in and will be checked at some point. So already threatening mate in one move. Yeah, and here we can see that the rook is hanging, but but then there will be a perpetual check, and now there's no help anymore. White is not could hope for this and take, and he will take here with perpetual check, but does this move, and it's finished. So this was a model game by Karpov playing against the isolated queen pawn. Notice what he did. Strategic exchanges, getting rid of all the attacking pieces, leaving White with the weak pawn on d4, putting pressure on it, making White panic and play f4, and then launching an attack after there have been two weaknesses. So White's position got overwhelmed by all the defensive duties. A great game by Karpov, and this kind of games you see every month somewhere. White will lose and black will win, or if it's reverse color, this in this kind of way, and it's a technique you have to master. It's you when you play against the isolated queen pawn, because somehow people can easily get an isolated queen pawn, so you have to know how to play it against it as well, and this is the technique. It demands a little bit of patience. I hope you like this video. This was Sune Hansen, your host for GM Talks. Thank you for watching. Isolated queen pawn positions are important. If you want to be a good chess player and have good results, you need to know this stuff. And some think it's boring. I don't think so. I like it. And I'm here to share the good news. So, are you ready to understand some of the endings arising from this isolated queen pawn position? I hope so, because here we go with an old classic game from 1936 with two classic players, Floor versus Berg. And they don't play perfectly, but it's kind of okay. And of course, we'll go through the opening rather fast. It's not really interesting. This is still mainline theory, and they could play this today as well, I think. I think probably black would insert h6 here, something like this. But c5 cannot be that bad. Take, oops, sorry, take. Knight takes, and knight takes, bishop takes, and I think here in modern chess, black would probably just take back with the knight and say it's fine, but you can take with the queen as well. So we have a classic isolated queen pawn position. The thing here to know is which pieces are left. White has a knight, black has a knight, white has a white squared bishop, black has a white squared bishop, meaning there will probably be no attacks because they both have the same colored bishops. So it's not really an attacking, and you can see that black is missing his black squared bishop that would be strong on the black squares when the isolated pawn. You also see that this bishop here has the same color as this pawn, making it a slightly bad bishop. So in a sense, black has two weaknesses: a weak pawn on d5 and a bishop on the wrong color, you could say. But it's, as we said earlier, bad bishops protect good pawns. So it's not so easy. And I think the position is not that far from being equal, especially since black has two open files, which is the thing you get when you have an isolated queen pawn. By definition, you get two open files. Okay, let's get on with it. Bishop d3, attacking with the battery here. Check. Makes sense. Giving a check. Queen d2, knight c5, little trick. Are you gonna fall for it? And he went to b5, which is, I'm not sure why he went to b5, but it could be a little trick to provoke a6. Anyway, take a6. I'm not sure you should play a6 because as a general rule, you do not want to put your pawns on the same color as your bishops. And here we already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the white squares. Same color as the bishop. So be a little bit wary about this. Bishop e2. Makes sense. Going back. Check. Pushing the king back. King e1 has to guard the pawn here. Bishop e6, and we see that black is not afraid that white would take on e6, because then he would have a better pawn structure. Bishop d1, well, you could argue for bishop d3. Rook ac8 also makes a lot of sense. Getting the open file here. Often there's not much going on in the c file, but sometimes when this pawn has moved, there's more entry squares, because it's easy to guard. At the moment there's only one entry square, which is this one, and you can see that both the knight and the bishop are guarding it, so no problem there. Bishop b3, hitting the pawn. Bishop rook c7, king e2, connecting the rooks, always something you like. Rook fc8, rook 8d1, starting to eye the pawn. And we know there are two ideas against the isolated queen pawn. You can either blockade it and make the opponent passive, or you can try and win it, like Ben Larsen said you should. Knight d6, getting back. It could be here, could be somewhere. Anyway, black is playing decently good chess here, and there's no big problems. King e1, getting to a black square, so there's no check from bishop g4. Not that's very scary anyway. And rook d2. And here black decides to exchange the rook. I'm not sure I like that, actually. There is no need to do that. And in general, you should try and get some concessions, or maybe you should rearrange your pawns to b6 and a5 or something. But it seems, okay, I'm getting closer to a draw, and he decides to exchange all of the heavy pieces, and that's probably wrong. The problem is, if you don't exchange the heavy pieces, you have to guard the entry points and the d pawns. So black is of course afraid that white will take over the c file, but he does have a very good knight here, and he could do some annoying stuff. So I'm not sure that I would not have taken here either. I would have gone back and put the king anyway. Anyway, now the d pawn is surely covered, but we get this, and this is a classical ending where black has a bad bishop, a bad pawn on d5, and no more problems really. But there is a little bit here with the white squares and so on, and if black defends very well, he will not lose. If he defends very badly, he will lose. And in this game he will lose. And as a general rule, I would not recommend you go into this voluntarily. There's no reason to do that. Just stay the beep out of here. King c2, 94. And white black decides that he's going to play here. And in this position, Belyavsky and Mihalchin recommends that black takes the bishop. I'm not sure I like it, but because I think that actually the knight is just as good as the bishop. But as it comes, it looks like it was a better idea. But anyway, I would probably play something like a5 here or something for sure. But king d6 makes sense. Now we have two pieces covering d5, no problems. Bishop c2, and here we know the rule: put the pawns on the opposite color. So what to do here? Yeah, h6 must be the right move. g6, and we got all the pawns on the white squares, which is a sign that at the time in 1936 they didn't quite know that this was probably not the best idea. The problem is you get into Zugzwang. The problem is also this bishop will always have something to attack. It's difficult. You have to move 6 pawns to get something that the bishop can't attack. And that's a lot. a4, probably a good move. Here, come on, play a5, for God's sake. Bishop d7, attacking the pawn. But the pawn was always going to go up. And we see that we have these pawns here are now stuck on bad squares, and you would rather have that's look weird, to have them on these two squares. So king knight e6 and b4, and here black realized, it's not good. I can't really. The bishop ending is losing. I'm gonna lose that bishop ending because white will always have the option to get you into Zugzwang or transpose into a one king and a pawn ending, because there are too many entry squares. There is here, and here. So the king will always have to stand here, and white will combine some attack with the threat of pushing the pawns. We can look at that in another video, if but you can just trust me. The bishop ending is really bad. It's actually totally lost. Knight c7 also makes sense. The knight is the best piece for black. Bishop d3 covering everything. The pawn ending is of course also lost, so don't go into that. Bishop e8, f4, and we see that white puts his pawns on black squares. Bishop d7, bishop e2, and they're not playing completely precise here, but it's you get the picture, and this is probably a rather good example here. I would probably say that you should probably play f5 or h5 to prevent the pawns from start rolling, and be sure. A good rule of thumb is to exchange some pawns. So if you could get play this pawn for this pawn, that would be a nice achievement. That's something you would like. And in general, you would like to just clear all the pawns, because then you have a draw. So get ready. Sort of, you have to narrow the front. Does it make sense? I don't know. Knight b3, bishop c6, g4, and it's already too late. The pawns is coming to d5 and putting these. Putting these pawns here on white squares forever, and we'll see how to do this. It's kind of instructive. I think white plays pretty well from here. Knight f6, knight c5. This good square. We see that it's very stable here due to this pawn. Knight e8, g5, and putting all the pawns on black squares. So what's the next plan? It's clear. You want to push this pawn to this square, making it something very dangerous if the h pawn ever disappears, which it might actually do. So you're preparing for some transformation of your advantages. Bishop d3. Sometimes you want to play f5. Knight e8, but probably not. And knight b3 is just weird. It doesn't make sense. The knight was very good on c5. There's no reason. He could start with the h4, h5 plan anyway. But okay, he's playing with very. He's not taking any chances. The good shallow floor here. Bishop b2, bishop c7, and here comes h4, bishop d7, h5, knight e8, h6. Okay, that was part 8 of the plan or something. And we see that one of the things is if, for instance, if the f pawns are exchanged, let's say these two disappears, then white will probably already threaten something like this, and this one will queen. So this is part of the problem for black, that that suddenly, even though it looks like a wall of pawns, you can always attack something. King e7, bishop f3, king bishop e6, knight b3, and here he realized. And the good thing, and a very important thing, is to remember you have time. You don't have to hurry. You don't have to rush it. You can just wait, and if you make a slight mistake, just go back and try again, because nothing changes here. Black, we can see that all black's pawns are more or less fixed on white squares, so you have time to find the perfect setup. So please wait. That's what technique about. Keep control. Knight c5, attacking here, and we see that this pawn is, and this was not part of black's wet dream to have bishop e2, king d6, bishop d3, controlling all the squares, knight e8, and it's now time for white to switch gears with e4. And this is a very common thing that you will at some point need to change the structure to win. And here black is very passive with these pawns here, and there are targets everywhere, so it's just the right time. You cannot really improve. You would of course like to have your king on d4, but you're probably afraid of some checks or something. And after this here we have everything. Oops. Oh, not attacking here, and you could cover with this, but then white's king will go like a Pac-Man and eat the pawn on a7 at some point. You'll get into Zugzwang. It will not be funny at all. And this knight will be very passive. You might end up losing it actually. So instead, black tries to go for this pawn, which makes a little bit sense, but of course knights are not very good in this kind of situations because they are short-legged. Knights are short-legged. So after this move and here, black simply resigned. These pawns are just gonna go, and we see that this problem is rather big. It's not something you just solve. Here black resigned and white won. So what did we learn here? Well, we learned a little bit about how to place the pawns, which pieces determine the play, and how to arrange them, and you will probably be able to use this someday in one of your games if you play chess regularly, because it's very common scenario. This was DM Talks. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you soon one day.